Part 6. The Howl and the Echo. Just as Ragnar's axe became slick with the creature's ichor and Elara staggered slightly, a new sound ripped through the chaotic din of snarls and clashing steel. It was a howl, deep and resonant, unlike anything they had heard before. It echoed through the hills, and for a brief moment, the smaller creatures surrounding them seemed to falter, their glowing eyes flicking nervously towards the source of the sound. Then, the howling came again, closer this time, and it was answered by other howls in the distance, creating a chilling chorus that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. The creatures around Ragnar, Elara, and Astrid became agitated, their snarls turning into whimpers. Some of them began to back away, their predatory hunger momentarily overshadowed by a primal fear. From the darkness beyond the firelight, larger shapes began to emerge. These are similar to the creatures they had been fighting, but bigger and more powerfully built. Their eyes glowed with an even fiercer intensity, and their howls resonated with a chilling authority. Ragnar realized with a grim certainty that they had stumbled upon something more than just isolated predators. They had likely disturbed a nest or hunting pack, and these larger beasts were the dominant members. The smaller creatures were now scattering, making way for their larger kin. The turning point had come, but not in their favor. The initial wave of attackers had been a mere scouting party. Now, they faced the true strength of whatever lurked in these shadowed hills. The weariness in Ragnar's limbs intensified, but a new resolve hardened his gaze. They had survived the first onslaught. They would face this new threat with the same Viking spirit that had carried their ancestors across vast oceans. The boring history of their people was filled with tales of overcoming impossible odds, and they would add their own saga to that legacy. I will generate the concluding part of the story. Part 7 prompt. Describe the final confrontation and the resolution of the story. Detail the outcome of the battle and the immediate aftermath for Ragnar, Elara, and Astrid. Part 7. Dawn and Departure. The larger creatures were formidable foes, their claws longer, their teeth sharper, and their hides thicker. Ragnar, Elara, and Astrid fought with a desperate ferocity, their movements honed by exhaustion and the primal instinct to survive. Ragnar's axe found purchase against tougher hides, but each swing cost him more strength. Elara's speed was now hampered by fatigue, yet her strikes remained precise. Astrid's spear kept the beasts at bay, but the force of their lunges threatened to overwhelm her. The battle raged until the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky. As the pale light began to creep over the hills, the howls of the creatures diminished, replaced by guttural snarls of frustration. One by one, the larger beasts, followed by their smaller kin, began to retreat back into the shadows, their glowing eyes fading into the growing light. Finally, the last of them disappeared into the tree-line, leaving behind a scene of carnage. The ground around the dying fire was littered with the still forms of the creatures, their dark ichor staining the earth. Ragnar leaned heavily on his axe, his chest heaving, his body aching in every muscle. Elara stood beside him, her sword dripping, her face streaked with dirt and blood. Astrid, though pale, held her spear steady, her gaze still scanning the surrounding woods. They had survived. The rising sun revealed the extent of their injuries, cuts, bruises, and exhaustion etched on their faces and bodies. Their small encampment was destroyed, their meager supplies scattered. Yet they stood. Ragnar looked at Elara and Astrid, a flicker of grim pride in his weary eyes. They had faced an unknown terror and emerged victorious. This night, devoid of boring history, had forged a new tale of courage and resilience. Without a word, they began to gather what remained of their belongings. The joy of survival was tempered by the knowledge of their losses and the long journey ahead. But as they started to move, leaving behind the blood-soaked ground, they carried with them not just their wounds, but also the quiet understanding that they had faced the darkness together and lived to see the dawn. The memory of the chilling howls and the glowing eyes would forever be etched in their minds, a stark reminder of the night the boring history lessons had fallen silent, and the true, brutal reality of survival had spoken. Once upon a time, in the dusty, sun-scorched lands of the Wild West, there was a notorious outlaw named Bud Gayson Urirai. His name echoed through the canyons and saloons, a whisper of fear and a legend in the making. Bud wasn't just any bandit. Rumors claimed his eyes glowed with an unholy fire, a mark of a pact made with shadows in the deepest caverns. The wanted posters plastered across every town bore a stark image of a man with a wild, untamed beard and eyes that indeed seemed to pierce through the paper itself. Our story begins in the small, beleaguered town of Redemption Gulch. The townsfolk lived under a perpetual cloud of anxiety, ever wary of Bud Gayson's next raid. Their once vibrant community was now subdued, their laughter stifled by the looming threat. Among them lived a young woman named Clara, fiercely independent and possessing a spirit as fiery as the desert sun. Clara ran the town's only general store after her father's passing. She was the heart of Redemption Gulch, her resilience a beacon of hope in their troubled times. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, a group of dusty travelers stumbled into Redemption Gulch. They were a motley crew. Jedediah, a grizzled old prospector with tales etched on his weathered face. Silas, a quiet and observant man with a knack for tinkering with machines, and a charismatic but shifty-eyed gambler known only as the Serpent. They claimed to be passing through, but there was a palpable tension in their demeanor, a hidden agenda that Clara couldn't quite decipher. As the travelers settled in the town's meager saloon, a commotion erupted outside. A lone rider galloped into town, his face pale with terror. "Bud Gayson," he gasped, pointing back the way he came. "He's coming this way. They say he's got a whole gang with him this time." Panic seized Redemption Gulch. The townsfolk scrambled to barricade their homes and businesses, their fear turning into a desperate resolve to protect what little they had. Clara, though frightened, felt a surge of defiance. She wouldn't let Bud Gayson terrorize her town any longer. Meanwhile, the travelers in the saloon exchanged knowing glances. Jedediah clutched a worn leather-bound map. Silas nervously adjusted something hidden beneath his coat, and the Serpent's eyes gleamed with anticipation. It was clear they knew more than they were letting on about Bud Gayson's impending arrival. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the ominous sound of approaching horses echoed through the stillness. Bud Gayson Urirai and his gang descended upon Redemption Gulch like a pack of wolves. They were a rough and menacing bunch, armed to the teeth and with a hunger for plunder in their eyes. Bud, a towering figure with a thick, fiery red beard and those unsettling eyes, surveyed the town with a cruel smirk. Well, he drawled, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little lamb waiting to be fleeced." The gang charged into the town, their gunfire shattering the fragile peace. The townsfolk, though outnumbered, fought back with surprising courage, defending their homes and families. Clara, armed with her father's old shotgun, stood firm behind the counter of her store, taking aim at any outlaw who dared to approach. Amidst the chaos, the travelers revealed their true intentions. Jedediah unfurled his map, revealing a hidden passage leading out of Redemption Gulch. Silas unveiled a cleverly disguised Gatling gun, which he expertly positioned to provide cover fire. And the Serpent, surprisingly agile, darted through the streets, sowing confusion among the outlaws. It turned out that these travelers were not mere wanderers. They were bounty hunters, each with their own reasons for wanting to bring down Bud Gayson Urirai. Jedediah had lost his claim to Bud's treachery. Silas's family had been victimized by the outlaws' gang, and the Serpent, despite his shady demeanor, had a personal vendetta against Bud. A fierce gunfight ensued. Bullets whizzed through the air, and the dusty streets became a battleground. Clara, inspired by the bravery of the bounty hunters and the resilience of her fellow townsfolk, fought with unwavering determination. She even managed to take a shot at Bud Gayson himself, grazing his arm and earning a furious glare from the outlaw leader. The fight raged on until dawn broke, casting long shadows across the ravaged town. One by one, Bud Gayson's gang members fell, their reign of terror finally coming to an end in the dusty streets of Redemption Gulch. Cornered and wounded, Bud Gayson faced the combined might of the bounty hunters and the townsfolk. In a final, desperate move, Bud lunged at Clara, his eyes burning with an unholy light. But before he could reach her, Silas's Gatling gun roared to life, riddling the outlaw with a volley of bullets. Bud Gayson Uriurine, the terror of the Wild West, fell silent in the dust. A collective sigh of relief swept through Redemption Gulch. The nightmare was finally over. The townsfolk emerged from their barricaded homes, their faces etched with exhaustion, but their eyes shining with newfound hope. Clara, standing amidst the debris, looked at the bounty hunters with gratitude. "You saved us," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Jedediah smiled, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. "We had our own reasons, Miss Clara, but it was your town's spirit that truly turned the tide." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over Redemption Gulch, the townsfolk began the arduous task of rebuilding. The scars of the battle would remain, but so would the memory of their courage and resilience. And Clara, the heart of Redemption Gulch, knew that their town, though shaken, was finally on the path to healing and a brighter future, free from the shadow of Bud Gayson Uriurine. The legend of the glowing-eyed outlaw would forever be a part of their history, a reminder of the day Redemption Gulch truly earned its name. Beyond the dusty horizon, where thorny bushes and rugged rock formations stretched endlessly, lay Sundown City. Its name, though seemingly mystical, belied a harsh and unforgiving reality, much like nature itself. Life for the residents of this town revolved around the sound of gunfire and the thud of horse hooves. Among them were several notable individuals whose destinies intertwined on one peculiar evening. First, there was Old Jack, with his cowboy hat, a furrowed brow, and an old rifle in hand. Jack was both the protector and the enigma of Sundown City. It was rumored that many years ago, he had been a notorious outlaw, but after some unknown incident, he changed his ways and began living as the town's guardian. Yet, his past always remained shrouded in mystery. Next was Callie, the owner of the town's only saloon. With her reddish hair, sharp gaze, and sweet smile, Callie was the heart and soul of Sundown City. Even in dire situations, she never lost her courage and always tried to bring smiles to people's faces. However, beneath her smile lay a deep sorrow that she never let anyone see. One day, a stranger arrived in Sundown City, Eagle-Eye Dan. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and his hand with a gun was lightning fast. It was clear from Dan's demeanor that he had come with a specific purpose. He seemed somewhat worried while checking his horse's saddle outside the town, as if he had lost something valuable. That very day, wanted posters appeared on the outskirts of the town, featuring a notorious bandit named Bud Gayson Uriurine. Many townsfolk flinched at the sight of his burning eyes on the poster. It was said that wherever Bud Gayson went, he brought destruction. Countless murders and robberies were linked to his name. Just a few days later, Bud Gayson Uriurine's gang truly attacked Sundown City. They were far superior in number and armed with advanced firearms. Although initially terrified, the townspeople, led by Old Jack, stood their ground. Callie closed her saloon doors, comforting those who sought shelter inside, while Eagle-Eye Dan moved around the town's nooks and crannies, keeping an eye on the bandits' movements. The gunfight began. The air grew heavy with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Jack, with his old rifle, accurately picked off bandits one by one. Callie, from her saloon window, took opportune shots. But the bandits were too numerous, and slowly, they began to take control of the town. Just then, Eagle-Eye Dan appeared as a savior. He swiftly leaped from one rooftop to another, raining bullets down on the bandits. With his impeccable aim, one bandit after another fell to the ground. Inspired by Dan's courage and skill, the townspeople found new resolve. But the fight was not yet over. Bud Gayson Uriurine, with that terrifying gaze seen on the poster, had been hiding, waiting to witness the town's downfall. When he saw that his gang was almost defeated, he stepped forward himself. In his hand was a gleaming revolver, and in his eyes, the fire of ferocity. Bud Gayson aimed his gun directly at Callie and fired. Callie closed her eyes in fear, but the bullet did not hit her. In a split second, Eagle Eye Dan rushed forward, pushing Callie out of the way, and took Bud Gayson's bullet himself. Before Dan fell to the ground, he drew his own revolver and shot Bud Gayson in the chest. Bud Gayson let out a horrific scream and collapsed, the fiery gaze in his eyes slowly extinguishing. Eagle Eye Dan was also severely wounded. Callie rushed to him and began to cry, holding him. Dan managed a weak smile and said, "I think I found what I was looking for." Then his breath faded. The people of Sundown City celebrated their victory, but a deep sorrow filled their hearts. They realized that Eagle Eye Dan had sacrificed his life to save their town. What he had been looking for while checking his horse's saddle was perhaps the hope for a new life, which he had found among the people of Sundown City. Old Jack silently. The sun beat down on Whisperwind Gulch with a vengeance. Two blazing orbs in the sky, seemingly conspiring to bake the very life out of the earth. It was a place where hope had dried up faster than a desert creek, a forgotten speck on the vast canvas of the American West. Marshall Thorne, a man whose glory days were long behind him, had sought refuge here, hoping the perpetual dust and silence would bury the ghosts of his past. He often stood, shielding his eyes from the relentless glare, trying to blot out not just the sun, but the memories that seared deeper than any desert heat. Thorne carried the weight of a monumental failure, a town he couldn't save, a family he couldn't protect. His uniform was long shed, replaced by the nondescript clothes of a prospector, but the lawman's burden clung to him like burrs. He just wanted to disappear, to let the wind whisper away his name. But the West rarely granted peace to the weary. The threat loomed large, plastered on every peeling wall, a wanted poster bearing the image of Bud Gayson Urirai. His eyes, a chillingly accurate depiction of the rumors, seemed to glow with an unnatural, malevolent light, promising destruction. Bud Gayson wasn't just a bandit. He was a force of nature, ruthlessly expanding his dominion, choking off remote settlements like Whisperwind Gulch by cutting off supply lines and terrorizing the few prospectors who still dared to chip away at the barren hills. The townsfolk, a haggard lot, lived in a constant state of dread, their faces etched with a mix of fear and simmering anger. Old Man Silas, whose eyes always darted nervously, had seen Bud Gayson's cruelty up close. Young Jeb, whose face was a mask of raw fury, had lost his meager claim to Bud's expanding empire. One sweltering afternoon, a new shadow fell over Whisperwind Gulch. A quiet, stoic figure rode in, his face obscured by the brim of his hat, a thick, coppery beard catching the sunlight. He dismounted, a well-worn saddle slung over his shoulder, a gleaming revolver holstered low on his hip. This was Clint. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man on a mission, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing. He rented a small, run-down cabin and kept to himself, though his presence, calm and formidable, was noted by all. Among the few pillars left in Whisperwind Gulch was Eleanor Vance. Sharp, intelligent, and fiercely determined, Eleanor ran the town's general mercantile, trying to keep her family's legacy afloat despite Bud Gayson's stranglehold. She watched Thorne with a wary eye. She'd seen enough lawmen abandon their posts to trust easily. Yet, desperation gnawed at her. Supplies were dwindling, and fear was turning into despair. Thorne initially wanted no part of it. He'd seen the wanted poster, heard the terrified whispers. He'd even seen the frantic face of a young prospector, screaming in terror after encountering Bud Gayson's men. He just shook his head, retreating deeper into his self-imposed exile, shielding his face not from the sun, but from the appeals in their eyes. The tipping point came with the chilling news that Bud Gayson's gang had systematically burned every family farm in a nearby valley, kidnapping the children and demanding impossible ransoms. This was not mere banditry. It was an act of pure, unadulterated evil. It snapped something in Thorn. He looked at the haunted faces around him, the despair in Eleanor's eyes, the sheer terror in Silas's, the raw anger in Jeb's. He couldn't hide anymore. That evening, in the dusty saloon, Thorn stood up. His voice, rusty from disuse, carried surprising authority. "We can't just wait to die," he declared, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Bud Gayson won't stop until there's nothing left." Clint, who had been silently nursing a drink, set his glass down. "He knows this land better than any man alive," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And I know him." A stunned silence fell. Clint looked up, his eyes meeting Thorn's. "I rode with him once, before his eyes started burning like that, before he lost whatever soul he had." Clint revealed that he had been hunting Bud Gayson for months, seeking to atone for his past association. The saddle he carried wasn't just equipment. It was a symbol of his solitary, relentless journey. A plan began to form. Thorn, with his old lawman's tactical mind, Clint, with his intimate knowledge of Bud Gayson's methods and hideouts, and Eleanor, with her precise understanding of the local landscape and dwindling resources, started to forge a desperate strategy. They would use the very harshness of the desert against Bud Gayson, luring him into a carefully chosen ambush point, a narrow pass where the relentless sun beat down, creating mirages and sapping strength. The showdown was set. As the sun reached its zenith, two blinding discs in the bleached sky, Bud Gayson and his riders galloped into the trap. Bud Gayson, a monstrous figure, his red beard ablaze in the sunlight, his legendary eyes indeed seeming to glow with an eerie, internal fire, laughed as he saw the small, defiant group waiting. "Looks like some lambs came to the slaughter," he bellowed, drawing his shining revolver. But Thorn was no lamb. His gun, old but true, barked first, clipping one of Bud Gayson's men. Clint, moving like a phantom, appeared on a ridge, his own revolver spitting fire. He knew Bud Gayson's tics, his favorite moves, and anticipated them. Eleanor, from a hidden position, signaled to a group of townsfolk they had armed, who then released a strategically placed rock slide, creating chaos and confusion among the gang. The battle raged under the twin suns. Dust, gunpowder, and the desperate cries of men filled the air. Thorn moved with the renewed purpose of a man given a second chance, his years of experience guiding his aim. Clint, driven by a deeply personal vendetta, engaged Bud Gayson in a brutal, up-close fight, their revolvers flashing. Bud Gayson's eyes burned with a maniacal rage, but Clint, knowing the man's every weakness, fought with a cold, precise fury. Finally, with a gut-wrenching shot, Clint hit Bud Gayson squarely. The infamous outlaw staggered, his glowing eyes dimming, and he fell, a legend collapsing into the dust from which he rose. A weary silence descended. The fight was over. Whisperwind Gulch was free. Thorn, though bruised and exhausted, felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. He looked at the grateful faces of Eleanor, Silas, and Jeb. He hadn't fully buried his past, but he had finally found a measure of redemption. Clint, his mission fulfilled, simply nodded to Thorn and Eleanor. He took his saddle, swung it over his shoulder, and walked towards the horizon, a solitary figure disappearing into the fading light. Another phantom of the West moving on. Whisperwind Gulch, scarred but victorious, began the long, hard journey of healing, a testament to the day they faced their fears under the blazing twin suns and won. Beyond the dusty horizon, where thorny bushes and rugged rock formations stretched endlessly, lay Sundown City. Its name, though seemingly mystical, belied a harsh and unforgiving reality, much like nature itself. Life for the residents of this town revolved around the sound of gunfire and the thud of horse hooves. Among them were several notable individuals whose destinies intertwined on one peculiar evening. First, there was Old Jack, with his cowboy hat, a furrowed brow, and an old rifle in hand. Jack was both the protector and the enigma of Sundown City. It was rumored that many years ago, he had been a notorious outlaw, but after some unknown incident, he changed his ways and began living as the town's guardian. Yet, his past always remained shrouded in mystery. Next was Callie, the owner of the town's only saloon. With her reddish hair, sharp gaze, and sweet smile, Callie was the heart and soul of Sundown City. Even in dire situations, she never lost her courage and always tried to bring smiles to people's faces. However, beneath her smile lay a deep sorrow that she never let anyone see. One day, a stranger arrived in Sundown City, Eagle-Eye Dan. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and his hand with a gun was lightning fast. It was clear from Dan's demeanor that he had come with a specific purpose. He seemed somewhat worried while checking his horse's saddle outside the town, as if he had lost something valuable. That very day, wanted posters appeared on the outskirts of the town, featuring a notorious bandit named Bud Gayson-Urine. Many townsfolk flinched at the sight of his burning eyes on the poster. It was said that wherever Bud Gayson went, he brought destruction. Countless murders and robberies were linked to his name. Just a few days later, Bud Gayson-Urine's gang truly attacked Sundown City. They were far superior in number and armed with advanced firearms. Although initially terrified, the townspeople, led by Old Jack, stood their ground. Callie closed her saloon doors, comforting those who sought shelter inside, while Eagle-Eye Dan moved around the town's nooks and crannies, keeping an eye on the bandits' movements. The gunfight began. The air grew heavy with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Jack, with his old rifle, accurately picked off bandits one by one. Callie, from her saloon window, took opportune shots. But the bandits were too numerous, and slowly, they began to take control of the town. Just then, Eagle-Eye Dan appeared as a savior. He swiftly leaped from one rooftop to another, raining bullets down on the bandits. With his impeccable aim, one bandit after another fell to the ground. Inspired by Dan's courage and skill, the townspeople found new resolve. But the fight was not yet over. Bud Gayson-Urine, with that terrifying gaze seen on the poster, had been hiding, waiting to witness the town's downfall. When he saw that his gang was almost defeated, he stepped forward himself. In his hand was a gleaming revolver, and in his eyes, the fire of ferocity. Bud Gayson aimed his gun directly at Callie and fired. Callie closed her eyes in fear, but the bullet did not hit her. In a split second, Eagle-Eye Dan rushed forward, pushing Callie out of the way, and took Bud Gayson's bullet himself. Before Dan fell to the ground, he drew his own revolver and shot Bud Gayson in the chest. Bud Gayson let out a horrific scream and collapsed, the fiery gaze in his eyes slowly extinguishing. Eagle-Eye Dan was also severely wounded. Callie rushed to him and began to cry, holding him. Dan managed a weak smile and said, "I think I found what I was looking for." Then his breath faded. The people of Sundown City celebrated their victory, but a deep sorrow filled their hearts. They realized that Eagle-Eye Dan had sacrificed his life to save their town. What he had been looking for while checking his horse's saddle was perhaps the hope for a new life, which he had found among the people of Sundown City. Old Jack silently. The moon hung like a skeletal fingernail in the inky sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the dimly lit bedroom. Elias, a man whose hair was now more salt than pepper, lay rigidly in his bed, a landscape of tangled sheets beneath him. His eyes, bloodshot and burning like twin embers, stared fixedly at the ceiling. Each creak of the old house, each rustle of leaves outside the window, amplified in the suffocating silence of the night. Sleep, that elusive balm, remained stubbornly out of reach. He tried everything: warm milk, chamomile tea, counting imaginary sheep until the woolly creatures blurred into an indistinguishable mass. He'd even resorted to the ancient family remedy of tying a clove of garlic to his big toe, a practice his wife, before she passed, had always sworn by. Tonight, however, even the potent aroma of garlic seemed to mock his wakefulness. The old pendulum clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour, a somber note echoing through the stillness. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, willing his mind to empty, to surrender to the sweet oblivion of slumber. But his thoughts were like restless insects, buzzing and flitting around, refusing to be silenced. Memories of the day, a minor squabble with the shopkeeper, the worry about his grandson's upcoming exams, the nagging ache in his knee, replayed themselves endlessly, each scene sharper and more vivid than the last. He shifted onto his side, the rough cotton of his nightshirt scratching against his skin. The pillow felt lumpy and unyielding. He punched it a few times, trying to reshape it into a more comfortable form, but it remained stubbornly resistant. A sigh escaped his lips, a sound heavy with frustration and fatigue. It wasn't always like this. There were nights when sleep descended swiftly, a gentle embrace that carried him away to peaceful realms. But lately, these nights of restless torment had become more frequent, stretching into what felt like an eternity. The lack of sleep was beginning to take its toll. He felt sluggish and irritable during the day, his thoughts clouded, his concentration fractured. He glanced towards the window, where the faint outline of the moon was still visible. The night seemed endless, a vast expanse of darkness stretching out before the promise of dawn. A wave of loneliness washed over him, a familiar ache in the quiet hours when the world was hushed and still. He missed his wife, her soft breathing beside him, the comforting weight of her hand in his. She had always been his anchor, his solace in the sleepless hours. He tossed and turned again, pulling the thin blanket closer, then pushing it away in a sudden wave of heat. His mind raced, jumping from one worry to another, each one fueling his agitation. He thought of his responsibilities, his unfinished tasks, the ever-present anxieties of daily life in their small Bangladeshi village. The rising cost of rice, the unpredictable weather threatening the crops, the distant rumblings of political unrest. They all seemed magnified in the darkness. He imagined the rest of the village, nestled in their slumber, finding respite from the day's toils. He pictured the fishermen sleeping soundly before their early morning journey on the river, the farmers gathering strength for the demanding work in the fields, the children dreaming innocent dreams. Why was he, Elias, condemned to this wakeful purgatory? A sudden sound from outside made him jump. It was just a stray dog howling at the moon, but in his heightened state of anxiety, it sounded like a mournful omen. He held his breath, listening intently, but the village remained quiet once more. He closed his eyes again, focusing on his breathing, trying to slow the frantic rhythm of his heart. Inhale, exhale, but his mind refused to cooperate, conjuring images of the ceiling, the walls, the darkness that pressed in around him. Elias knew he needed sleep. His body ached for it, his mind craved the release. But sleep, like a shy and skittish creature, refused to be caught. He was trapped in the liminal space between wakefulness and dreams, a prisoner of his own restless mind, yearning for the oblivion that remained just beyond his grasp in the long, unforgiving hours of the night. The night stretched on, and Elias, weary and wide-eyed, remained a silent testament to the tyranny of sleeplessness, the weaver of forgotten threads. In a small, unassuming village nestled beside the Padma River, lived an old woman named Rohima. Her face was a road map of wrinkles, each line telling a silent story of seasons past, of joy and sorrow interwoven like the threads in her loom. Rohima was the village's weaver of Nakshi Kanta, the traditional embroidered quilts of Bengal. But her creations were more than just blankets. They were repositories of memory, each stitch a whisper of a life lived, a love shared, a loss mourned. As the years passed, the vibrant colors of her earlier kantas had softened, the intricate patterns becoming more abstract, like dreams fading at the edges. Her eyesight wasn't what it used to be, her hands trembled slightly, but her spirit, the wellspring of her art, remained undimmed. However, a creeping sadness had begun to settle over her, as if a vital thread in her own life was slowly unraveling. The reason for her sorrow was the fading tradition of Nakshi Kanta itself. The younger generation, drawn to the allure of modern fabrics and fast-paced city life, had little interest in the slow, deliberate art of embroidery. The stories that once flowed from the needles of mothers and grandmothers onto the cloth were being replaced by the fleeting narratives of television and the internet. Rohima felt like the last keeper of a sacred language, a language that was slowly being forgotten. One sweltering afternoon, as Rohima sat hunched over her ancient loom, her fingers fumbling with a particularly stubborn thread, a young girl named Leela hesitantly approached her hut. Leela was different from the other children in the village. While they chased kites and played in the dusty fields, Leela often sat quietly by the riverbank, observing the intricate patterns of the water's flow or the delicate veins on a fallen leaf. "Dottie, grandmother," Leela began, her voice soft as the rustle of jute leaves. "I see you weaving. What are you making today?" Rohima looked at the girl. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a flicker of warmth. She hadn't had a curious visitor in a long time. "Just an old piece, Leela. Trying to finish what my own grandmother started." Leela sat beside her, her gaze fixed on the half-finished kanta spread across the loom. It was a tapestry of faded blues and greens, depicting scenes of village life from a time long past. Women fetching water from the pond, farmers tilling the land, boats sailing along the river. But some parts were incomplete, the threads hanging loose, the stories unfinished. "It's beautiful," Leela whispered, tracing a faded lotus with her finger. "It looks like a story." Rohima smiled, a genuine, heartwarming smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "It is, my dear. Every kanta tells a story. This one is about the year the great storm came and changed everything." Over the next few weeks, Leela became a regular visitor to Rohima's hut. She sat quietly, watching the old woman's gnarled fingers dance across the fabric, listening intently as Rohima recounted the tales woven into the threads, stories of love and loss, of festivals and famines, of the enduring spirit of their village. Leela wasn't just listening, she was remembering. As Rohima spoke, images bloomed in her young mind, vivid and real, as if she herself had witnessed these events. She saw the fear in the villagers' eyes during the storm, the joy of the harvest festival, the quiet sorrow of a mother who had lost her child. One day, Leela asked Rohima, "Dottie, can you teach me?" Rohima's heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since anyone had expressed interest in learning her craft. Her eyes welled up with unshed tears. "My eyes are not so good anymore, Leela. My hands are shaky." "I will help you," Leela said with a determined glint in her eyes. "You can tell me the stories, and I will learn to weave them with you." And so, an unlikely partnership began. Rohima, with her fading vision and trembling hands, guided Leela, her young fingers nimble and eager to learn. Rohima shared the secrets of the stitches, the kanta, the four, the intricate chadai, and more importantly, she shared the stories, the emotions, the very soul of Nakshi Kanta. Leela proved to be a quick and dedicated student. She listened intently to Rohima's instructions, her needle moving with surprising precision. Together, they worked on the unfinished kanta, Leela carefully filling in the missing threads, guided by Rohima's memories and the faded outlines. As they worked, something magical began to happen. The old stories, whispered by Rohima and woven by Leela, seemed to come alive again. The colors, though faded on the older parts of the kanta, seemed to gain a new vibrancy where Leela's needle had passed. The spirit of the ancestors, the joys and sorrows of generations past, seemed to re-emerge from the fabric. The other villagers, who had long dismissed Nakshi Kanta as an old-fashioned pastime, began to notice the transformation. They saw Leela sitting beside Rohima, her young head bent in concentration, her needle flashing in the sunlight. They saw the beauty of the unfinished kanta, the way it seemed to breathe with forgotten life. Curiosity grew, and soon, other young girls started to gather around Rohima's hut, watching Leela work, listening to the stories. Inspired by Leela's dedication, some of them asked Rohima to teach them too. Rohima's heart swelled with a joy she hadn't felt in years. The forgotten threads were being picked up again. The stories were being retold, not just in words, but in the intricate patterns of the quilts. The tradition, which she had feared was dying, was being reborn in the nimble fingers and eager hearts of the new generation. Leela, the quiet girl who loved to observe the world, had become the weaver of forgotten threads, not just in the kantas she created, but in the hearts of her community. She had reminded them of the beauty of their heritage, the power of their stories, and the enduring magic that can be woven, stitch by careful stitch, from the fabric of memory. And Rohima, the old weaver, knew that her legacy, the vibrant tapestry of their village's history, would continue to be woven for generations to come.